Boy finds bear inside his home. What happens next, no one believes. Jennifer Thompson was finishing washing the breakfast dishes when she heard the sharp cry of her son, Ethan, coming from the living room. She dropped everything and ran, expecting to find the 3-year-old boy crying over a dropped toy or hurt from one of his morning antics. What she saw made her freeze completely in the doorway. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, staring intently at a gigantic brown bear that occupied nearly half the space between the sofa and the television. The animal, its golden brown fur glistening under the light streaming through the large windows, remained motionless, simply watching the child with dark, expressive eyes. Jennifer felt her legs go weak. Her heart raced so fast she could hear the beats echoing in her ears. How was it possible for a bear to be inside her home? How? Had it gotten in? And most importantly, what should she do now to protect Ethan? The boy, wearing his favorite gray shirt and the blue shorts he had chosen for the day, showed no fear. On the contrary, his big, curious eyes studied the animal with the same fascination he usually reserved for his cartoons. His bare feet stayed, firmly planted on the light wooden floor, as if he were hypnotized by the bear's presence. Jennifer tried to breathe, but the air seemed too thick for her lungs. She needed to get Ethan out of there, but any sudden movement could startle the animal and make the situation even more dangerous. Her hands trembled as she gripped the wall to keep from falling. The bear shifted slightly, making Jennifer hold her breath. But the animal merely adjusted its position, continuing to watch Ethan with a calmness that seemed almost human. There was no sign of aggression in its posture, but Jennifer knew that could change at any moment. Michael, her husband, had left early for work at the auto parts store he managed downtown. She was completely alone in handling this impossible situation. Their closest neighbors lived several houses away, and shouting for help might frighten the bear. Slowly, Jennifer reached out toward her son, trying to get his attention without making a sound. Ethan turned his head toward her, his dark curls swaying with the movement, but his eyes quickly returned to the bear, as if under some kind of spell. The animal was enormous. Jennifer guessed it must weigh at least 400 pounds, maybe more. Its fur looked soft and well kept, not like that of a wild animal living in nature. There was something different about it, something she couldn't quite place. That's when she noticed a small collar around the bear's neck. A red collar, with what appeared to be a tiny identification tag. Did that mean the animal had an owner? That it had escaped from somewhere? The questions multiplied in her mind, but the immediate situation remained the same. Her son was just a few feet away from a massive bear. Jennifer tried to remember everything she had ever read or heard about bears. No sudden movements, no running, no screaming. But all that advice felt too abstract in the face of the reality before her. Ethan was just a small, helpless child, and she was the only thing standing between him and danger. Her cell phone was in the kitchen, on the counter where she had left it after checking messages from Ethan's daycare moms group. She needed to call the police, the fire department, someone who knew how to handle wild animals. But that would mean leaving Ethan alone with the bear, even if only for a few seconds. The bear moved its head slightly, and Jennifer saw its eyes, briefly turn toward her. There was an intelligence there that surprised her. The bear knew she was present, knew she was scared, but showed no signs of aggression. It was as if it was just visiting. Ethan took a small step toward the bear, and Jennifer almost screamed in despair. She managed to control herself at the last second, but her entire body tensed up. The boy was acting with the innocence typical of his age, unaware of the potential danger of the situation. The bear watched the child's movement, and, to Jennifer's utter surprise, took a slight step back as if wanting to maintain a respectful distance. This behavior confused her even more. What kind of bear would act like this? Why wasn't it showing any signs of territoriality or aggression? Jennifer realized her palms were sweaty and that she had been holding her breath for too long. She forced herself to breathe slowly and steadily, trying to stay calm enough to think clearly. She needed a plan, a way to get Ethan out of there without provoking the animal. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. It was then that she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Michael had returned. He must have forgotten something at home, as he occasionally did when distracted by problems at the shop. Jennifer felt a wave of relief mixed with worry. At least she wouldn't be alone anymore, but now she had to keep Michael from entering, the house unaware of the situation. The bear also heard the sound of the car and turned its head toward the front door. Its muscles tensed slightly, but it didn't stand up or show any signs of panic. It was as if it was used to human presence. Jennifer heard Michael's footsteps approaching the front door. She needed to warn him somehow, without startling the bear. She moved slowly along the wall, trying to reach the entrance without drawing unnecessary attention from the animal. The sound of the key in the lock echoed through the house, and Jennifer managed to reach the doorway just as Michael opened the door. She grabbed his arm before he could step inside, pressing a finger to her lips in a desperate plea for silence. Michael, a 42-year-old man with hair just beginning to gray at the temples, looked at his wife with a confused expression. He was wearing his blue work shirt and still held the keys in his hand, clearly not understanding why Jennifer was acting so strangely. She pulled him outside and closed the door gently behind her. In a shaky, quiet voice, she began explaining the impossible situation they were facing. Michael stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "A bear, Jennifer? Inside our house?" he whispered, trying to process the information. "That's impossible. How would a bear even get into our house?" "I don't know how, Michael. I just know it's in there with Ethan," Jennifer replied, her hands trembling as she gripped his arm. "We need to call someone. The police, the fire department, someone who knows what to do." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Jennifer knew well, one that meant he was trying to think quickly of a solution. He was a practical man, used to fixing mechanical problems at the shop, but this situation was far beyond his experience. "Where exactly is it?" he asked, his voice tight with rising tension. "In the living room near the couch, and Michael—" Jennifer hesitated before continuing. "It's wearing a collar. It looks like it has an owner." That piece of information completely changed the expression on Michael's face. If the bear had a collar, it meant someone was taking care of it, that it might be somewhat domesticated. But even so, it was a wild bear inside the house where their young son lived. Michael carefully approached one of the living room windows, trying to peer inside without being noticed. What he saw shocked him just as much as it had Jennifer. Ethan remained standing in the same spot, still watching the gigantic animal with childlike fascination. The bear stayed in the same position, sitting on the wooden floor like an oversized dog. Its movements were calm and controlled, with no signs of agitation or aggression. Michael had to admit, the animal's behavior was completely different from what he'd expect from a wild bear. "I'm calling the police," Michael said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Wait," Jennifer grabbed his arm. "What if they come armed? What if they hurt the bear in front of Ethan? Our son could be traumatized forever." Michael stopped dialing, understanding the dilemma. On one hand, they needed professional help to handle the situation. On the other, any official response might involve methods that could traumatize Ethan or injure the bear, which clearly wasn't showing aggression. That's when Michael noticed something Jennifer hadn't. The back door of the house was slightly ajar. That must have been how the bear got in. But how had it managed to open the door, and why had it chosen their house specifically? "The back door is open," Michael murmured to Jennifer. "It must have come in that way." "But we always keep it locked," Jennifer replied, confused. "Do you remember leaving it open last night?" Michael strained to recall. The night before, he'd gone out to gather the laundry from the clothesline when it started raining. It was possible that in his hurry, he'd forgotten to lock the door completely. But even so, how would a bear know how to open a door? As they whispered outside the house, they didn't notice someone approaching from the sidewalk. It was an elderly woman around 70 years old, wearing a floral dress and walking with a decorated cane. Her gray hair was tied in a bun, and her expression was one of quiet determination. "Have you seen Bailey?" the woman asked when she was close enough to speak to them. Michael and Jennifer turned, startled. They didn't know this woman, and the name Bailey meant nothing to them in the middle of this crisis. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't know who you're talking about," Michael replied politely, though clearly eager to get back to dealing with the bear. "Bailey is my bear," the woman explained calmly. as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He ran away last night while I was distracted making his dinner. I've been looking for him all morning." Jennifer felt her legs nearly give way again. The woman had just confirmed there really was a bear loose in the neighborhood, and that this bear apparently lived with an ordinary person like a pet. "You have a bear as a pet?" Jennifer asked, her voice full of disbelief. "Not exactly as a pet," the woman answered, steadying herself on her cane. "My name is Margaret Wilson. I've been taking care of Bailey for 8 years, ever since he was an orphaned cub. He was rejected by his mother at a zoo in Chicago and was about to be euthanized when I got custody of him." Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, trying to process this extraordinary information. There was really a woman in the neighborhood who had been raising a bear for 8 years. How was that possible? How did no one know about this? "Mrs. Wilson," Jennifer said carefully, "we found a bear in our house this morning. He's inside right now with our 3-year-old son." Margaret's face lit up with relief, but then quickly filled with concern. "I won't hurt the child," she said quickly. "Bailey was raised around kids. He's very gentle, but I need to get him out of there before someone calls the authorities." Jennifer felt a mix of relief and apprehension. On one hand, it was comforting to know the bear had a history of peaceful coexistence with humans. On the other, there was still a 200-pound wild animal in the same room as her young son. "How are we going to get Bailey out of there without scaring Ethan?" Michael asked, showing he was starting to accept the reality of the situation. Margaret thought for a moment, looking at the house and then at the couple. "Do you have honey?" "At home," she asked. Jennifer nodded, confused by the seemingly unrelated question. "Bailey loves honey. If I can lure him with it, he'll come to me willingly. But I need you to trust me and let me go inside." Michael looked at Jennifer, and she could see the hesitation in his eyes. Letting a 70-year-old stranger into their home to handle a giant bear seemed as surreal as the whole situation. But what choice did they have? "What if something goes wrong?" Jennifer asked. "What if the bear, Bailey, gets startled and attacks Ethan or you?" "He would never attack me," Margaret replied with a conviction that impressed Jennifer. "And he has a soft spot for children. You need to trust me." Jennifer looked through the window again. Ethan had sat on the floor and was playing with one of his toy cars, seemingly having accepted the bear's presence as part of his morning reality. The animal kept watching the boy intently, but hadn't moved from its spot. The situation was completely out of the ordinary, but Jennifer realized Margaret might truly be the solution. The alternative was calling the authorities, which could traumatize Ethan and potentially endanger the bear. "All right," Jennifer finally said, "but I'm going with you. I won't leave my son alone in there." Margaret nodded, understanding Jennifer's maternal concern. "Of course, but we need to move slowly and stay calm. Bailey can sense nervousness, and it might confuse him." Michael went to fetch the honey from the kitchen, entering through the back door and moving quietly so as not to disturb the scene in the living room. When he returned with the jar of honey, his hands were also trembling, slightly. Margaret opened the jar and dipped her fingers into the golden sticky honey. The sweet scent filled the air as she slowly approached the front door. "Remember, slow movements and quiet voices," she instructed before opening the door. Jennifer's heart raced again as they stepped inside. Being near the bear was even more intimidating than watching through the window. The animal was truly massive, its presence dominating the room. Margaret moved with a confidence that starkly contrasted Jennifer and Michael's nervousness. She walked slowly toward the living room, holding the honey in front of her. "Bailey," she called softly, her voice full of affection. "My boy, what are you doing here?" The bear turned its head immediately at the sound of Margaret's voice. Its eyes brightened with clear recognition, and it let out a low sound that was almost like a purr. Jennifer was amazed by the animal's reaction. It was like a giant dog seeing its owner after a long separation. Ethan looked at Margaret curiously, but didn't seem frightened by the arrival of another stranger. To him, the whole situation felt like an interesting game. Bailey stood up slowly, his muscles shifting under his thick fur. Even as he rose, his movements were controlled and deliberate. He started moving toward Margaret, but stopped halfway and looked at Ethan as if saying goodbye. Jennifer held her breath as the bear approached her son. Bailey lowered his massive head until it was level with Ethan and gently touched the boy's face with his snout. It was such a tender and careful gesture that Jennifer felt tears welling up in her eyes. Ethan laughed and stretched out his tiny hand to touch the bear's fur. The contact lasted only a few seconds, but Jennifer knew that moment would be etched in her son's memory forever. "Come on, Bailey," Margaret called again, holding out her hand with honey. "Let's go home." The bear stepped away from Ethan and walked toward Margaret with slow but deliberate steps. When he reached her, he licked the honey from her fingers with a giant pink tongue. Then he positioned himself beside the elderly woman, like an obedient dog waiting for instructions. "Good boy," Margaret said, stroking Bailey's fur with obvious affection. "Now let's go home and talk about your nighttime adventures." Jennifer couldn't believe what she was seeing. The 70-year-old woman had complete control over a giant bear with nothing more than kindness and a bit of honey. It was like something out of a movie, except it was happening in her living room. Margaret walked toward the door and Bailey obediently followed. When they reached the entryway, she turned to Jennifer and Michael. "I'm sorry for the scare," she said sincerely. "Bailey has never run away before. I must have left the gate unlatched last night." How do you manage to care for a bear?" Michael asked, still trying to process everything that had happened. "It's a long story," Margaret replied. "Perhaps you'd like to come over for coffee someday. I'd love to get to know the neighbors better, especially this brave little boy." She looked at Ethan, who had moved closer and was watching Bailey with unbroken fascination. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Margaret asked, bending down with difficulty to meet Ethan's height. "Ethan," the boy answered in his sweet child's voice. "Ethan, you were very brave today." "Bailey really liked meeting you," Margaret said, and Jennifer noticed tears in the elderly woman's eyes. Margaret straightened up with the help of her cane and walked toward the door with Bailey at her side. The bear paused at the threshold and looked back one more time, his eyes seeming to linger on Ethan for a moment before following Margaret out of the house. Jennifer, Michael, and Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the elderly woman and the giant bear slowly make their way down the sidewalk. It was such a surreal sight that Jennifer had to blink several times to convince herself she wasn't dreaming. "Mommy, is the bear coming back?" Ethan asked, tugging at Jennifer's shirt. Jennifer looked at her son, seeing the hope in his big eyes. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that what had just happened was extraordinary and would likely never happen again? "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered honestly, "but meeting Bailey was really special, wasn't it?" Ethan nodded vigorously, already heading back to the living room to grab his toys, seemingly accepting the whole experience as a normal part of his morning. Michael closed the door and leaned against it, running his hands over his face. "Jennifer, do you believe what just happened?" he asked. "No," Jennifer replied, laughing nervously. "I'm still waiting to wake up from this crazy dream." But as she tidied the house and tried to return to their normal morning routine, Jennifer couldn't stop thinking about Margaret and how a 70-year-old woman had managed to raise and care for a bear for 8 years without anyone in the neighborhood knowing. Later that day, after Michael had returned to work and Ethan was taking his afternoon nap, Jennifer decided she needed to learn more about her new neighbor. Curiosity was gnawing at her, making it impossible to focus on anything else. She placed Ethan in his stroller and went out for a walk around the neighborhood, hoping to find out where Margaret lived. It wasn't hard to spot. There was only one house in the area that could hide a bear, a larger property at the end of the street with high walls and thick vegetation. Jennifer stopped in front of the gate, hesitating about whether to ring the bell. Part of her just wanted to go home and pretend nothing had happened, but another part was too fascinated to simply ignore the situation. That's when she heard voices coming from the backyard. One was clearly Margaret's, but there were others too, a younger woman and what sounded like an older man. Jennifer moved closer to the gate, trying to listen without being intrusive. "You can't just disappear." "At night, Bailey," the younger woman's voice was saying. "You scared everyone." Jennifer heard the sound she now recognized as Bailey's purring in response. "He's never done that before," Margaret explained. "Something's different. Maybe he's sensing something we're not aware of." "Mom, you need to be more careful," the man's voice said. "If the authorities find out about Bailey, you know what could happen." Jennifer realized she was eavesdropping on a private family conversation and felt guilty. She was about to step away when Ethan woke from his nap in the stroller and started fussing. "Who's there?" Margaret's voice called from the backyard. Jennifer flushed, realizing she'd been caught. She had no choice but to respond. "It's me, Jennifer," she called back. "Ethan's mom, I wanted to thank you for this morning." She heard footsteps approaching the gate, and soon Margaret appeared, opening it with a warm smile. "Jennifer, what a pleasure to see you. And—" "This must be little Ethan," Margaret said, bending down to look at the child in the stroller. Ethan smiled and reached out, clearly recognizing Margaret and wanting to be picked up. "He must remember his bear friend," Jennifer said, lifting Ethan from the stroller and noticing how he brightened in Margaret's presence. "Please, come in," Margaret said, opening the gate wider. "You've arrived at the perfect time. I was talking with my children about today's adventure." Jennifer hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity outweighed any apprehension. She followed Margaret into the backyard, which was much larger than it appeared from outside. There were fruit trees, a well-tended garden, and at the back a fenced area where Bailey lay in the shade of a mango tree. 2 adults were sitting in garden chairs near a table with coffee and cookies, a woman around 40 with dark hair in a ponytail, and a slightly older man with a graying beard. Both stood as Jennifer and Ethan approached. "These are my children, Sarah and David," Margaret said. "Sarah, David, this is Jennifer and little Ethan, the neighbors who met Bailey this morning." Sarah stepped forward with a warm smile, though Jennifer could see worry in her eyes. "Jennifer, I'm so sorry for the scare Bailey must have given you," Sarah said. "I hope you weren't too shaken." "Actually, it was a unique experience," Jennifer replied, still processing the fact that she was talking to the family of someone who kept a bear. David, who had remained more reserved, stepped forward and extended his hand. "Forgive the direct question, but are you planning to report this to any authorities?" he asked, and Jennifer could hear the tension in his voice. The question caught her off guard. Jennifer hadn't really considered that possibility after Margaret had resolved the situation so peacefully. "I hadn't thought about that," she answered honestly. "Why are you all worried?" Margaret sighed and gestured for everyone to sit around the table. "It's a complicated situation, Jennifer," she began. "Technically, I shouldn't have Bailey. The permit I had to care for him expired 3 years ago, and the authorities wanted to transfer him to a zoo." Jennifer felt a knot form in her stomach. She was beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation she had accidentally gotten involved in. "But couldn't you renew the permit?" she asked. "The regulations changed," Sarah explained. "Now it's much harder for private individuals to get permits to care for wild animals, even in rescue cases like Bailey's." David added, "Mom refused to hand over Bailey because she knew he'd be put in a small cage at a zoo after living in relative freedom here for years. It would be cruel." Jennifer looked at Bailey, who was resting peacefully under the tree. It was hard to imagine that gentle animal confined to a small cage after knowing the freedom of Margaret's backyard. "So you're keeping Bailey illegally?" Jennifer asked softly. "We're keeping Bailey at home," Margaret replied firmly. "He's not property, he's family." Ethan, who had been playing with some toys Margaret had given him, suddenly looked toward Bailey and shouted happily, "Bear, bear." Bailey lifted his head at Ethan's voice and slowly stood up. To Jennifer's surprise, the bear began walking toward the group. "He remembers Ethan," Sarah said, smiling. "Bailey has an excellent memory for people." When Bailey got closer, Ethan tried to wiggle out of Jennifer's lap to go to the bear. Jennifer tensed, but Margaret reassured her. "It's fine. Bailey is very careful with children," she said. Jennifer reluctantly set Ethan down, ready to grab him back at the first sign of danger. But Bailey approached with the same gentleness he had shown that morning, lying down to be at Ethan's level. The child went to him fearlessly and began petting Bailey's thick fur. The bear closed his eyes, seeming to enjoy the attention. "How have you managed to keep this a secret for so long?" Jennifer asked, watching her son interact with the bear. "A lot of caution and a lot of luck," David replied. "Mom always kept Bailey out of sight from strangers, and our immediate neighbors know about the situation and agreed to keep it quiet." "Until today," Sarah added worriedly. "Bailey's escape," might have ruined everything. If someone had seen him, on the street, or if you had called the police. Jennifer realized the difficult position the family was in. On one hand, she understood their love for Bailey and their desire to protect him. On the other, there were legal and safety issues. How that couldn't be ignored. "Can I ask how it all started?" Jennifer said. "How did you get custody of Bailey in the first place?" Margaret smiled, her eyes filling with nostalgic tears. "My late husband, Robert, worked for 30 years as a veterinarian at zoos," she began. "When Bailey was born at the Chicago Zoo, his mother rejected him. The zoo didn't have the resources to care for an orphaned cub at the time, and they were going to euthanize him." Jennifer's heart clenched at the thought of the small, helpless bear cub. "Robert used every contact he had to get a special permit to bring Bailey home," Margaret continued. "The idea was to take care of him until he was big enough to be transferred to a proper sanctuary." "But you got attached to him," Jennifer said, understanding the situation. "It was impossible not to," Sarah replied. "Bailey was like a giant dog, playful, affectionate, smart. When the time came to move him, Mom and Dad just couldn't do it." David continued the story. "Dad managed to renew the permit for a few years, using his connections in the veterinary field. But when he passed away 4 years ago, everything got more complicated." Jennifer began to grasp the emotional complexity of the situation. Margaret wasn't just sheltering a wild animal, she was protecting a family member she'd raised since he was a cub. "And now?" Jennifer asked. "What happens if the authorities find out?" "They'll take Bailey," Margaret said simply, but her voice trembled with emotion. "And at 82 years old, I'll never see him again." The statement hung in the air heavy with sadness and fear. Jennifer glanced at Ethan, who was now sitting beside Bailey, using the bear as a backrest while playing with his toy cars. The scene looked so natural it almost seemed ordinary. "Have you thought about trying to get a new permit?" Jennifer asked. "We tried for 2 years," David answered. "But the regulations have changed so much it's practically impossible. They want Bailey kept in facilities we can't afford to build, with specialized veterinarians on call 24/7, specific insurance. It's a process designed for big organizations, not individuals." Sarah added, "Besides, Bailey is already 12. In the wild, bears of his species live about 20 to 25 years. Moving him now after a whole life here would be traumatic for him." Jennifer studied Bailey again. The bear looked healthy and well cared for. His coat was shiny, his eyes alert, and his demeanor calm and controlled. It was obvious he received proper care and plenty of affection. "Can I ask about this morning?" Jennifer said. "Why did Bailey come to our house specifically?" Margaret and her children exchanged glances, and Jennifer sensed there was something they hadn't mentioned yet. "Bailey has a special talent for finding people who need help," Margaret said carefully. "What do you mean?" Jennifer asked, intrigued. "It's hard to explain," Sarah said. "But over the years, Bailey has shown an almost supernatural ability to sense when someone is in danger or needs help. He's led us to lost hikers, injured children, even adults going through emotional crises." A shiver ran down Jennifer's spine. Were they suggesting Bailey had gone to their house for a specific reason? "You think Bailey came to our house because he sensed someone needed help?" she asked. "It's possible," David said. "Have you been going through any difficulties lately? Something Ethan might have picked up on even though he's so young." The question hit Jennifer like lightning. Over the past few weeks, she and Michael had been arguing constantly about money troubles. His store wasn't doing well and they were considering downsizing to a smaller home. They tried not to argue in front of Ethan, but little kids noticed more than adults realized. "We have had some struggles," Jennifer admitted reluctantly. "Nothing too serious, but there's been tension at home." Margaret nodded as if she'd expected that answer. "Ethan probably sensed the tension even if you tried to hide it," she said gently. "Bailey might have picked up on that from the boy when they met this morning." The explanation seemed unlikely, almost mystical, but Jennifer couldn't deny there was something special in the way Bailey had interacted with Ethan. The bear had shown a kindness and care that went beyond the normal instincts of an animal. Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. As Jennifer processed this information, she noticed the daylight was beginning to shift. It was already mid-afternoon, and Ethan would soon be hungry for a snack. She needed to go home, but part of her didn't want to leave that magical backyard where a giant bear played gently with her son. "I need to take Ethan home," she said reluctantly. "But can I ask you something? If you're so worried about the authorities, why did you tell me the whole truth?" "You don't even know me." Margaret smiled and looked at Ethan, who was now lying beside Bailey, using the bear's belly as an improvised pillow. "Because Bailey trusts you," she said simply, "and I trust Bailey's judgment." Jennifer stood and went to get Ethan, who protested as she picked him up. "I don't want to go, Mom," he said, reaching his arms out toward Bailey. "We'll come back to visit Bailey, okay?" Jennifer promised, hoping it was a promise she could keep. Margaret rose with the help of her cane. "You're welcome here anytime," she said. "And Jennifer, thank you for not judging our situation. I know it must seem crazy to an outsider." "Actually, it seems like love," Jennifer replied sincerely. "And I understand family love." As she walked home with Ethan, Jennifer felt overwhelmed by everything she'd discovered. In just a few hours, her normal life had been turned upside down by the realization that her neighbors kept a bear as a family member. Even more unsettling was the suggestion that Bailey had come to their house because he'd sensed Ethan needed some kind of help or comfort. The idea seemed fantastical, but Jennifer couldn't ignore how her son had responded to the bear, or how the whole experience had brought her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. When she got home, Michael was still at work. Jennifer gave Ethan a snack and tried to return to their normal routine, but her mind kept drifting back to Margaret and Bailey. Their family's situation was precarious. They were living in constant fear of being discovered and separated from the animal they considered family. That evening, when Michael came home from work, Jennifer told him about her visit to Margaret's house. He listened quietly, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "Jennifer, do you realize we've gotten involved in something that could be dangerous?" he said when she finished. "If the authorities find out we knew about Bailey and didn't report it, we could face legal trouble too." "But Michael, you saw how Bailey acted with Ethan," Jennifer argued. "He's not dangerous, he's part of their family." "That doesn't change the fact that it's illegal," Michael replied. "And what if something happens? If Bailey hurts someone? We'd be responsible for not reporting it." Jennifer understood Michael's concern, but she couldn't forget the desperation in Margaret's eyes when she spoke about the possibility of losing Bailey. "What if we helped them find a legal solution?" she suggested. "Maybe there's a way to make Bailey's situation official without him being sent to a zoo." Michael looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Jennifer, we don't know anything about wildlife laws or permits. How could we possibly help with something like that?" "We could research, look for specialized lawyers, talk to animal protection organizations," Jennifer replied, surprised by her own determination. "There has to be something we can do." Michael sighed and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Jennifer knew well. "Why is this so important to you?" he asked. "We barely know these people." Jennifer thought about Michael's question. Why did she feel so compelled to help Margaret and Bailey? Part of her knew the answer lay in how Ethan had reacted to the bear, in the peace she'd felt in that backyard, in the contrast between the harmony of Margaret's family and the tension that had been growing in her own home. "Because they showed me something today," she finally said. "For they showed me it's possible to build a family based on love and acceptance, even in the most unlikely circumstances. And because Ethan connected with Bailey in a way I've never seen him connect with anything before." Michael was silent, for a moment processing Jennifer's words. "Do you really think we can help?" he asked. "I think we can try," Jennifer replied. "And even if we can't change the legal situation, at least we can offer our friendship and support." That night, after Ethan went to sleep, Jennifer and Michael spent hours researching online about wildlife laws, private sanctuary permits, and animal rescue organizations. What they found was discouraging. The regulations were indeed very strict, And obtaining a permit to keep a bear on private property was nearly impossible for individuals. But they also discovered a few organizations that acted as intermediaries between wildlife owners and authorities, helping find solutions that benefited both the animals and their caregivers. "Look at this," Michael said, pointing at the computer screen. "There's an organization in Chicago that specializes in cases like Bailey's. They help set up legal sanctuaries for animals that can't be reintroduced to the wild." Jennifer read about the organization with growing interest. They had helped dozens of families legalize the status of rescued animals, creating sanctuaries that met legal requirements while allowing the animals to stay with their adoptive families. "This could work for Bailey," she said hopefully. "If Margaret could turn her property into an official sanctuary, Bailey could keep living there legally. But that would probably involve property changes, inspections, expensive permits," Michael pointed out. "Margaret is 82. Would she have the energy and resources to go through all that?" It was a valid question, but Jennifer felt it was worth at least presenting the option to Margaret and her children. The next day, Jennifer returned to Margaret's house with Ethan and a folder full of information she and Michael had printed about private sanctuaries and rescue organizations. Margaret welcomed her warmly, and Ethan immediately ran off to find Bailey, who was resting under the same mango tree as the day before. "I brought some information that might interest you," Jennifer said, showing the folder to Margaret. Sarah and David were also present, and they all gathered around the garden table as Jennifer explained what she'd learned about legal private sanctuaries. "This is interesting," Sarah said after reading some of the documents, "but it seems like it would take a significant investment to bring the property up to the required standards." "How significant?" David asked, clearly concerned about the financial aspect. Jennifer showed a list of typical requirements: fences of specific height, basic veterinary facilities, security systems, detailed documentation about animal care, and specialized insurance. "It could cost between $50,000 to $100,000, she admitted, depending on how many modifications would need to be made to the property. The number left everyone silent. It was clearly far more money than the family had available. "But there are funding programs and subsidies," Jennifer quickly added, "and some of these organizations help with fundraising campaigns for special cases." Margaret looked at Bailey, who was gently playing with Ethan, her eyes filled with tears. "I'd do anything to keep Bailey safe and legal," she said. "But at 82, I don't know if I have the energy to go through such a complicated process." "You wouldn't be alone," Jennifer said impulsively. "Michael and I could help, and I'm sure other neighbors would too if they knew the situation." Sarah and David looked at Jennifer in surprise. "You'd do that?" Sarah asked. "You barely know us." "We know enough," Jennifer replied. "We know a family who loves an animal that needs help, and we know an animal who clearly returns that love and even helps others like he did with Ethan." As if he'd heard his name, Ethan called out happily from across the yard, "Mommy, look, Bailey's teaching me to climb." Everyone turned to see Ethan trying to climb the low trunk of a fruit tree, with Bailey carefully positioned beneath him, as if ready to catch the child if he fell. "Oh my," Jennifer murmured, standing up to run toward Ethan. "Relax," Margaret said, touching her arm. "Bailey's done this with dozens of kids over the years. He's more careful than most adults." Jennifer watched nervously as Ethan, under Bailey's supervision, managed to climb to the first low branch of the tree. The child laughed with joy and waved at the adults, proud of his achievement. "How did Bailey learn to do this?" Jennifer asked. "Paternal instinct, maybe," David answered. "Or maybe Robert trained him when he was younger. Dad always said Bailey had a special gift for working with kids." Jennifer observed the interaction between her son and the bear, and an idea began forming in her mind. "What if you used Bailey's gift as part of the solution?" she said slowly. "How so?" Margaret asked. "Well, if Bailey has this natural ability to help children, and if you turned it into an official educational or therapeutic program, that could justify the sanctuary license." Sarah brightened at the idea. "Animal-assisted therapy is legally recognized," she said. "If we could document Bailey's skills and create a structured program, it could work," David finished, "especially if we partnered with schools or organizations that work with children with special needs." Margaret looked at Bailey and Ethan, who were now sitting side by side under the tree, with Ethan telling the bear a story in his mixed-up child's language. "Bailey would love that," she said softly. "He's always been happiest when helping others." The conversation continued for hours, with the family exploring possibilities and Jennifer offering practical help. They decided to contact the organization from Chicago that Jennifer had found for specific guidance on how to proceed. When Jennifer finally returned home with Ethan that afternoon, she felt more hopeful than she had in weeks. Not just about Bailey's situation, but about her own family. The time spent with Margaret had given her a different perspective on the problems she and Michael were facing. That evening, she told Michael about the day's developments. "So you have a plan?" he asked. "The beginning of one," Jennifer replied. "But it will take time and effort from many people." Michael grew thoughtful for a moment. "Jennifer, can I ask you something? Do you think all this interest in helping Margaret and Bailey has to do with the problems we're having here at home?" The question caught her off guard, but Jennifer realized Michael was right. "Maybe," she admitted. "Seeing how they stick together, even facing such big challenges, made me realize our problems are solvable if we work together." Michael stepped closer and hugged her. "You're right," he said. "I've been so worried about the shop that I forgot to focus on what really matters, our family. And maybe helping. Margaret will help us too," Jennifer added, "having a shared project, something positive to work on together." "About the shop," Michael said hesitantly. "I didn't want to worry you, but things are worse than I've admitted. I might have to close if I don't land some big clients soon." Jennifer felt her stomach tighten, but this time she didn't panic like she would have a few weeks ago. "Then we'll figure out a solution," she said calmly. "Together, just like we'll help Margaret and Bailey." In the days that followed, Jennifer and Michael threw themselves into two projects at once, helping Margaret explore legal options for Bailey and finding solutions to save the auto parts shop. Jennifer reached out to the organization in Chicago and arranged a phone consultation with an expert on private sanctuaries. The information she received was encouraging. There really was a possibility of legalizing Bailey's situation if they followed the right procedures. Meanwhile, Michael began considering ideas Jennifer had suggested to diversify the shop. Maybe they could offer services beyond just selling parts: installation, preventive maintenance, partnerships with local garages. Every day, Ethan asked to visit Little Bear Bailey, and Jennifer found these visits had become the highlight of her days. There was something deeply comforting about Margaret's backyard, where complex problems were met with quiet determination and genuine love. A week after their first encounter with Bailey, Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard a knock at the door. It was Sarah, Margaret's daughter, looking flustered. "Jennifer, I need your help," she said as soon as Jennifer opened the door. "We had an unexpected visitor this morning." Jennifer's stomach tightened. "The authorities?" she asked. "Not exactly," Sarah replied. "It was a man who said he was a journalist. He was asking questions about exotic animals in the neighborhood." "How did he know about Bailey?" Jennifer asked, inviting Sarah inside. "We're not sure. He mentioned getting an anonymous tip about a bear being kept illegally in the area," Sarah explained, clearly worried. "Mom managed to convince him she knew nothing, but he said he'd come back with more questions." Jennifer felt a wave of guilt. Could someone have seen Bailey the morning he escaped, or noticed Jennifer's comings and goings to Margaret's house? "What are you going to do?" she asked. "David thinks we should speed up the legalization process," Sarah answered. "Contact the Chicago organization right away and start the official process, even if we're not completely ready." "Is that possible?" Jennifer asked. "According to the expert you spoke to, yes. They can start the license application process while we make the necessary modifications to the property. But it's risky. If our request is denied, Bailey will be confiscated immediately." The situation had become much more urgent and dangerous. Jennifer realized that Margaret's family was facing a decision that could change their lives forever. "I want to help," she said. "What can I do?" "Actually, there's something specific," Sarah said hesitantly. "The expert said our application would be much stronger if we had testimonies from people in the community about Bailey's behavior and the benefits of keeping him here." people who've witnessed his positive interactions with children and adults. Jennifer understood immediately. "You want me to write a testimony about how Bailey interacted with Ethan?" she asked. "If you're comfortable doing that," Sarah replied, "but understand that by doing this, you'd be officially involved in the situation. There would be a legal record showing you knew about Bailey and supported his stay here. It was exactly the kind of involvement Michael had warned could be problematic. But Jennifer thought of Ethan climbing the tree with Bailey watching over him, the peace she'd felt in Margaret's backyard, the loving family fighting to stay together. "I'll write the testimony," she said without hesitation. Sarah smiled in relief. "Thank you, Jennifer. This means so much to our family." After Sarah left, Jennifer sat down to think about what she'd agreed to do. She was officially stepping into a complex legal situation, potentially putting her own family at risk. But for some reason, it felt like the right thing to do. When Michael came home that evening, Jennifer told him about Sarah's visit and her decision to write the testimony. "Jennifer, are you sure about this?" he asked worriedly. "Once you put it in writing, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Jennifer replied, "and I hope you'll write one too. You've seen how Bailey behaves with Ethan. You know he's not dangerous." Michael sighed, but Jennifer could see he was seriously considering it. "If I do this, it's because I trust your judgment," he finally said, "and because I think Margaret and Bailey deserve a chance." That night, Jennifer and Michael worked together to write detailed testimonies about their experiences with Bailey. Jennifer described the morning they found the bear with Ethan, the animal's gentleness, his obedient response to Margaret, and the positive interactions she'd observed since. Michael wrote about his observations of Bailey's controlled, non-aggressive behavior and how the bear seemed genuinely connected to Margaret's family. As they wrote, Ethan played on the living room floor with his toy cars, occasionally making bear sounds and saying "Bailey" to his toys. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Jennifer asked Michael as they reviewed their testimonies. "I think we're doing what we believe is right," Michael replied, "and sometimes that's all we can do." The next day, Jennifer took the testimonies to Margaret. The elderly woman accepted the documents with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You barely know us, yet you're willing to take a risk for us." "Actually, I feel like we've known you for a long time," Jennifer replied. "Some connections happen quickly." David was there and reviewed the testimonies approvingly. "These are excellent," he said, "very detailed and specific. They'll help our application tremendously." "When will you submit the request?" Jennifer asked. "Tomorrow," Margaret answered. "The specialist from Chicago is coming here in person to do an initial assessment of the property and help us complete the documentation." Jennifer felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. In less than 2 weeks, she had gone from a perfectly normal life to being involved in a complex legal case involving a rescued bear. "Can I be here when the specialist arrives?" she asked. "Of course," Sarah replied. "In fact, it would be helpful to have you here to corroborate our accounts of Bailey's behavior." That night, Jennifer barely slept. Tomorrow would be a crucial day in determining whether Bailey could continue living with Margaret legally or if he would be separated from the only family he'd ever known. The specialist arrived the next morning, a middle-aged man named Dr. William Parker, who had spent 15 years helping families legalize rescue animal situations. Jennifer was present with Ethan when Dr. Parker began his assessment. He first observed Bailey from a distance, taking notes on the animal's behavior, his living environment, and his responses to different stimuli. "Interesting," he murmured, as he watched Bailey interact with Ethan. "I rarely see a wild animal display so much self-control and situational awareness." Dr. Parker spent several hours asking Margaret detailed questions about Bailey's history, his veterinary care, diet, exercise, and behavior over the years. "Mrs. Wilson, I have to say I'm impressed," he finally said. "Bailey is clearly in excellent physical and mental condition. His weight is ideal, his coat is healthy, and his behavior indicates a well-adjusted, happy animal." "Does that mean we can get the permit?" Sarah asked hopefully. "It means you have a real chance, Doctor," Parker replied. "But I'll be honest, the process won't be easy. You'll need to make significant modifications to the property, establish formal veterinary protocols, and demonstrate financial stability to maintain the sanctuary long-term. Margaret nodded, showing she was prepared for the challenges. How long does the process usually take? David asked. Between 3 to 6 months, depending on how quickly you can implement the necessary changes, Dr. Parker explained. But there's a complication in your case. Jennifer felt her stomach tighten. What kind of complication? She asked. You mentioned receiving a visit from a journalist, Dr. Parker said. If he publishes a story about Bailey before our application is processed, local authorities might be forced to act immediately, regardless of our ongoing efforts. The weight of this information left everyone silent. They were now in a race against time. They needed approval before the situation became public. What can we do to speed up the process? Jennifer asked. A few things, Dr. Parker replied. First, you need to start property modifications immediately. Second, we need more community testimonials. Third, it would help to have a local vet agree to be Bailey's official caretaker. Jennifer remembered something. Michael knows a vet who handles large animals, she said. He takes care of horses on some farms in the area. Maybe he could help. Excellent, Dr. Parker said. The more local support you gather, the better our chances of success. The rest of the day was spent planning the necessary property modifications. The list was extensive. Higher security fencing, a quarantine area for medical emergencies, an alarm system, documentation of feeding and exercise protocols, and the installation of security cameras. This is going to cost a fortune, David murmured as they reviewed the list. Not necessarily, Dr. Parker said. There are many ways to cut costs. Volunteer work from the community, donated materials, local businesses willing to offer services, at a reduced rate in exchange for positive publicity. Jennifer remembered Michael and his connections in construction through the auto parts store. Michael knows a lot of people who work in construction and installation, she offered. I'm sure some of them would help. From that moment on, what had started as an effort by Margaret's family turned into a community project. Jennifer became a sort of informal coordinator, using her contacts and Michael's to recruit help. In the following days, a support network began to form. The veterinarian Michael knew Dr. Johnson agreed to become Bailey's official caretaker after meeting the bear in person and being impressed by his gentle nature. 2 contractors who were customers of Michael's store volunteered to help with fence modifications and security installations. A local alarm company offered equipment at cost after Jennifer explained the situation. Even neighbors who hadn't known about Bailey's situation before began to get involved once they heard the story. An elderly woman who lived 2 blocks away offered financial assistance after meeting Margaret and relating to her situation. It's incredible, Sarah said to Jennifer a week after the community project had begun. In just a few days, we've gotten more support than we expected to get in months. People like to help when they see a good cause, Jennifer replied, and everyone who meets Bailey in person is impressed by him. It was true. Every person who visited the property to help with the modifications left commenting on how gentle and well-behaved Bailey was. Several people offered to write additional testimonies for the application, but not everything was going perfectly. The journalist had returned twice, asking more specific questions and showing he was actively investigating the situation. Margaret was growing increasingly nervous, and Dr. Parker warned that they needed to prepare for the possibility of official interference before the licensing process was completed. That's when Michael had an idea. What if we talked directly to the journalist, he suggested during an evening meeting at Margaret's house. Instead of trying to hide the situation, we could tell our side of the story first. That's too risky, David protested. If he publishes the story, even if it's positive, it could force the authorities to act. But it could also generate public support, Jennifer added, considering Michael's idea. If people learn about Bailey through a story that highlights the positive side of the situation, it might be harder for the authorities to just confiscate him. Dr. Parker, who was present for the meeting, grew thoughtful. It's a risky strategy, but it could work, he said finally. If we could control the narrative, present Bailey as a rehabilitation success story rather than an illegal animal. We could emphasize the legalization process that's already underway, Sarah suggested. Show that we're being proactive and responsible. Margaret, who had been quiet during the discussion, finally spoke. I'm tired of hiding, she said. Bailey isn't some shameful secret. He's a beloved member of this family and this community. If we're going to fight for him, let's fight openly. The decision was made. The next day, Michael would contact the journalist and offer an exclusive interview on the condition that they could review the story before publication to ensure accuracy. Jennifer spent that night awake, wondering if they were making the right decision. In just a few weeks, her life had completely changed. She had gone from being a housewife worried about financial troubles to being at the center of a complex legal case that could draw regional attention. More importantly, her relationship with Michael had grown stronger through their shared project. Working together to help Margaret and Bailey had given them a new perspective on their own problems and a renewed sense of shared purpose. The following morning, Michael called the journalist. To his surprise, the man showed genuine interest in telling the full story, not just exposing an illegal situation. My name is Jason Miller, the journalist introduced himself when he arrived at Margaret's property that afternoon. I work for the regional paper, but I also freelance for larger publications. I'm interested in stories about the relationship between humans and animals. Jennifer studied Jason as he spoke. He was a man around 40, professional-looking, but friendly. He carried a camera and a recorder, but his approach seemed respectful rather than investigative. Before we begin, Margaret said, I need you to understand that Bailey isn't just an animal to us. He's family. I understand, Jason replied, and that's exactly the part of the story that interests me. How did you build this unique bond? The interview lasted several hours. Jason asked detailed questions about Bailey's story, from his rescue as a cub to his life now. He interviewed Margaret, Sarah, David, as well as Jennifer and Michael about their experiences with the bear. The most powerful moment came when Jason observed the interaction between Bailey and Ethan. The boy had arrived with Jennifer and immediately ran to greet the bear, who responded with his usual gentleness. This is extraordinary, Jason murmured as he filmed Ethan playing under Bailey's watchful supervision. How many children have interacted with Bailey like this? Dozens, Margaret answered. Neighbors' kids, friends' grandchildren, children from families who've visited over the years. Bailey has always been especially gentle with kids. Jason also documented the progress of the property modifications and the ongoing licensing process. He interviewed Dr. Parker by phone and obtained an official statement from the Chicago organization about the merits of the case. When will the story be published? Jennifer asked as the interview was wrapping up. I'll need a few days to write and fact-check, Jason replied. But it will likely run by the end of this week. After Jason left, everyone felt nervous waiting for the story to be published. Dr. Parker warned them to be prepared for any reaction, positive or negative. The story was published on Thursday morning on the front page of the regional paper's local section. The headline read, Love Without Borders, Family Cares for Rescued Bear for 12 Years. Jennifer bought several copies of the paper and read the story multiple times. Jason had done an excellent job, presenting the situation in a balanced and humane way. He emphasized the ongoing legalization process, the community's support, and Bailey's unique qualities. The response was immediate and mostly positive. Margaret's phone rang constantly all day with calls from people offering support, donations, and volunteer help. But there were also negative reactions. Some people expressed concerns about the safety of keeping a bear in a residential area. Others questioned whether it was fair to keep a wild animal in captivity, even under good conditions. More troubling, however, was the call Margaret received on Friday morning. Mrs. Wilson, the voice on the other end said, This is the Department of Environmental Protection. We need to schedule an inspection of your property as soon as possible. Margaret's heart raced. The publicity had forced the authorities' hand just as they had feared. When would you like to come? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Monday morning, if possible, the official replied. At 9 o'clock. Margaret hung up the phone and immediately called Dr. Parker. who promised to be present for the inspection. She also called Jennifer, who said she'd be there with Michael for moral support. The weekend passed in a haze of nervousness and final preparations. All the property modifications were rushed to be as complete as possible before the inspection. On Monday morning, Jennifer arrived at Margaret's house at 8. She found the 82-year-old woman dressed in her best clothes, sitting stiffly in the living room, clearly anxious. "How are you feeling?" Jennifer asked, sitting beside Margaret. "Scared," Margaret admitted. "What if they decide to take Bailey today? What if I never see him again?" Jennifer held the elderly woman's hand, feeling how it trembled. "That won't happen," she said with more confidence than she truly felt. "Dr. Parker said our application is strong, and you've seen all the support we've gotten since the newspaper story." Dr. Parker arrived at 8:30, carrying a folder full of documents. Sarah and David were already there, both looking as nervous as their mother. At exactly 9 o'clock, 2 official vans pulled up in front of the house. 4 people stepped out: 2 inspectors from the Department of Environmental Protection, an official veterinarian, and a woman who introduced herself as a representative from the Federal Attorney's Office. Jennifer's stomach dropped. The presence of someone from the Federal Attorney's Office suggested the situation was more serious than they had anticipated. "Good morning." The lead inspector, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, introduced himself. "I'm Inspector Douglas, and this is my team. We're here to assess the situation regarding the reported wild animal on this property." Dr. Parker stepped forward to speak with the officials, explaining the licensing process underway and presenting the documentation they had prepared. "We understand you've begun a regularization process," the federal attorney's representative said. "But our duty is to ensure the animal is being kept in suitable conditions and poses no risk to the community." The inspection was thorough and intimidating. The officials examined every aspect of the property, questioned Margaret in detail about Bailey's care, and observed the bear's behavior for over an hour. Jennifer watched nervously as the official veterinarian examined Bailey. To her relief, the bear cooperated fully, allowing the stranger to touch and measure him without showing any signs of aggression. "The animal is clearly in excellent physical condition," the official veterinarian murmured to his colleagues. "Ideal weight, healthy coat, calm and controlled behavior." After 3 hours of inspection, the officials gathered privately to discuss their findings. Jennifer, Michael, and Margaret's family waited anxiously in the yard, watching Bailey play peacefully, as if nothing unusual were happening. Finally, Inspector Douglas returned with his team. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his expression serious, "I'll be direct with you. This is a highly irregular situation." Margaret's heart stopped. "However," he continued, "it's obvious that you've taken exceptionally good care of this animal. His physical condition is excellent. His behavior is exemplary. And the modifications you've made to the property demonstrate a serious commitment to his safety and well-being." Jennifer held her breath, waiting for the verdict. "Given that you've already started the official licensing process and that the animal clearly poses no immediate risk to the community, we've decided to allow Bailey to remain here temporarily while your application is processed." Margaret let out such a deep sigh of relief that Jennifer thought she might faint. But the inspector continued, "There are strict conditions. You have 3 months to complete the licensing process. If for any reason the license is denied, or if there's any incident involving the animal, he will be removed immediately." Dr. Parker stepped forward. "Inspector Douglas, I can assure you the application will be processed well within the 3-month deadline, and based on the quality of care I've observed here, I'm confident it will be approved." "We hope so," the representative from the Federal Attorney's Office said. "We also want to make it clear that this decision does not set a precedent. Each case of a wild animal on private property will be evaluated individually." After the officials left, there was a moment of silence in the yard before Margaret began crying with relief. Sarah and David hugged her, and Jennifer felt tears forming in her own eyes. "We did it," Margaret murmured. "At least for now, we did it." Bailey, as if understanding the danger had passed, approached the group and lay down beside Margaret, resting his giant head on the elderly woman's lap. It was a moment of tenderness Jennifer knew she would remember forever. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the weeks following the official inspection, Jennifer's life took a turn she could never have imagined. The newspaper story had sparked interest from larger publications, and soon reporters from Chicago and even Los Angeles were reaching out to interview Margaret and meet Bailey. Jennifer found herself acting as an informal family spokesperson, helping coordinate interviews and ensuring the story was told positively and accurately. It was a role she'd never played before, but she discovered she had a natural talent for communication and organization. Michael noticed the change in his wife. "You seem more confident," he said one evening, after Jennifer had finished organizing a photo shoot for an environmental magazine. "More sure of yourself." Jennifer considered his words. It was true, dealing with Bailey's situation had awakened abilities she didn't know she had. She'd coordinated a community project, handled media attention, and helped navigate complex legal issues. "I think having a purpose made the difference," she replied. "Helping Margaret and Bailey gave me a sense that I can actually make a difference in people's lives and animals' lives." "What about our situation?" Michael asked. "The store is still struggling." Jennifer turned to her husband. Over the past weeks, she'd been so focused on helping Margaret that she'd nearly forgotten about her own family's financial troubles. "I'm sorry, Michael. I know I haven't been helping with that," she said, feeling guilty. "Actually, you have," Michael surprisingly replied. "All the connections you've made through the Bailey project have brought new clients to the store. That contractor who helped with the fence now brings all his business to us. The veterinarian Dr. Johnson recommended our store to 2 farms in the area." Jennifer hadn't noticed this connection. "Really?" she asked. "Really. In fact, this has been the best sales month we've had in over a year," Michael said, smiling. Apparently, helping the community is good for business too. It was a lesson Jennifer hadn't expected to learn. By focusing on helping others, she had inadvertently helped her own family. Meanwhile, the licensing process for Bailey was progressing. Well, Dr. Parker reported steady progress with the authorities in Chicago, and the modifications to the property were nearly complete. Most importantly, community support continued to grow. A group of neighbors had organized to create a Bailey Support Committee, which met weekly to coordinate aid efforts and fundraising. Jennifer had become the informal chair of this committee, a role she embraced with growing enthusiasm. It was heartwarming to see people who had never spoken before now working together for a common cause. But not everything was good news. A small but vocal group of residents had begun expressing opposition to Bailey's presence in the neighborhood. They started a petition demanding the bear be removed, arguing he posed a safety risk no matter how well-behaved he seemed. "It's natural not everyone will support this," Dr. Parker explained during one of the committee's weekly meetings. But thankfully, the positive support far outweighs the opposition. Still, the opposition was concerning. If it grew, it could influence the decision on Bailey's permit. It was Rachel, one of the neighbors who had joined the committee, who suggested a solution. "What if we organized a community event?" she proposed. "Something that lets people meet Bailey in person instead of just hearing stories about him." "Like an open house?" Jennifer asked, intrigued by the idea. "Exactly. We could combine it with educational activities about animal conservation, safety, around wildlife, that sort of thing," Rachel elaborated. Margaret was nervous about the idea of opening her property to dozens of strangers, but Sarah and David thought it could help. "Mum, the people who oppose Bailey have never seen him up close," Sarah argued. "Once they see how gentle and well-behaved he is, it'll be hard for them to keep objecting." Dr. Parker supported the idea, but stressed it had to be carefully organized to ensure everyone's safety. "Bailey may be gentle, but he's still a massive wild animal," he reminded them. "We need strict protocols for any public interaction." Planning the event took 2 intense weeks. Jennifer coordinated nearly every aspect, securing necessary permits, working with local authorities, recruiting volunteers, and even hiring an additional veterinarian to be present during the event. Michael contributed by providing equipment and materials through his business contacts, and even suggested using the event to showcase how small local businesses could support community causes. 2 weeks before the event, however, an unexpected problem arose. Jason Miller, the journalist who had written the original story about Bailey, called Jennifer with troubling news. "Jennifer, I need to warn you about something," he said when she answered the phone. "I've heard that a group of animal rights activists is planning to protest your event." Jennifer's stomach tightened. "What kind of protest?" she asked. "Apparently they believe keeping Bailey in captivity is animal cruelty, no matter how well he's treated," Jason explained. "They're organizing a protest demanding he be transferred to a wildlife sanctuary." "But Bailey is happy here," Jennifer protested. "Anyone who spends 5 minutes with him can see that." "I know, and I agree with you," Jason said, "but this group has a broader agenda about private ownership of wild animals. They're using Bailey's case to push their cause." Jennifer hung up the phone and immediately called Margaret to deliver the bad news. The elderly woman was visibly shaken. "Maybe we should cancel the event," she said. "I don't want to cause more trouble." "We're not canceling," Jennifer replied firmly. "We'll be prepared." In the days that followed, Jennifer worked tirelessly to prepare for any disruptions during the event. She coordinated with local police to ensure they would be present to maintain order if needed. She also arranged for Bailey's supporters to be strategically positioned to prevent any protest from overshadowing the event. Michael watched his wife with growing admiration. "Jennifer, you've become a true community leader," he said the night before the event. "I'm proud of you." "I'm just doing what needs to be done," Jennifer replied, but she could feel how much she had changed since that morning weeks ago when she found Bailey in her living room. The day of the event dawned clear and sunny. Jennifer arrived at Sam, Margaret's property, at 7 in the morning to oversee final preparations. Volunteers soon began arriving, setting up tents, organizing educational stations, and preparing parking areas. By 10 o'clock, when the event officially began, a line of families had already formed outside the property. To Jennifer's relief, the first visitors seemed genuinely interested in meeting Bailey and learning his story. Ethan was in his element, helping introduce Bailey to other children and explaining in his 3-year-old words how the bear was nice and careful. For 2 hours, everything went perfectly. Families wandered the property, observing Bailey from a safe distance and participating in educational activities. Several people remarked on how calm and well-adjusted the bear seemed. Then, around noon, the protesters arrived. About 15 people carried signs with messages like "Wild animals belong in the wild" and "Freedom for Bailey." They positioned themselves at the entrance and began chanting slogans. Jennifer felt her tension rise but remained calm. She had prepared for this possibility. The protest leader, a young man with dreadlocks and casual clothes, approached her. "You're exploiting this animal for entertainment," he accused. "Bailey should be in a real sanctuary, not displayed like a circus attraction." Jennifer took a deep breath before responding. "Bailey isn't being exploited," she said calmly. "He's living with the family that rescued and raised him. This event is to educate the community about animal conservation and show how rescued animals can be well cared for. Any confinement of a wild animal is abuse," the young man insisted, "no matter how well cared for he is." Then something unexpected happened. One of the families who had visited Bailey earlier stepped forward. "Excuse me," said the mother, holding a small child in her arms, "but I have to disagree with you." The protester turned to her, clearly expecting support. "My daughter has autism," the woman continued. "She rarely responds to people or animals, but when she saw Bailey, it was the first time I've seen her smile in months. He clearly has a special gift for connecting with children." Other families present began speaking up in support of Bailey. One after another, people shared how the bear had positively affected their children during the visit. Jennifer watched in amazement as a small crowd of supporters naturally formed around the protesters. There was no hostility, just people sharing their genuine experiences with Bailey. The pivotal moment came when a small child broke free from her parents and ran up to the protest leader. "Why do you want to take the little bear away?" she asked innocently. "He's nice." The young man looked at the child, clearly unprepared to answer such a direct question. It was then that Margaret, leaning on her cane, slowly approached the group. "Young man," she said to the protest leader, "may I ask what your personal experience is with caring for wild animals?" "I work with an animal rights organization," he replied, sounding less confident than before. "And have you ever personally cared for an orphaned wild animal?" Margaret continued gently. "No, but the theory is clear," the young man began. "Theory is important," Margaret interrupted softly. "But this is Bailey, it's not theory. He's an individual with a specific story and specific needs. He's only ever known one family his whole life. Taking him away from us at 12 years old would be traumatic for him." The elderly woman paused, looking directly at the young man. "You talk about animal rights," she said. "But what about Bailey's right to stay with his family? His right to live peacefully in the only home he's ever known?" Margaret's argument was simple but powerful. Jennifer noticed that several protesters were clearly questioning their stance. The group's leader seemed to realize he was losing support even from his own members. "We still believe you're wrong," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "And you're entitled to your opinion," Margaret replied graciously. "But I hope you'll consider what you saw here today. I hope you'll think about what Bailey truly wants, not just what you think he should want." The protesters huddled together, and after a few minutes of discussion, they began to disperse. Some even approached to apologize for the disturbance before leaving. The rest of the event went peacefully. Over 200 people visited the property throughout the day, and the vast majority left with a positive impression of Bailey and his family's situation. That evening, after all the visitors had gone and the volunteers finished cleaning up, Jennifer sat with Margaret and her family in the backyard. "How do you feel?" she asked the older woman. "Tired," Margaret admitted, "but also hopeful. Today showed that most people understand what we have here is special." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Nearly all the comments I heard were positive. Several people said they plan to write letters of support for our permit application." Dr. Parker, who had been present the entire event, joined the conversation. "From a legal standpoint, today was a success," he said. "We demonstrated transparency, community support, and Bailey's ability to safely interact with the public. All of this strengthens our case." Jennifer looked over at Bailey, who was resting under his favorite tree, seemingly unaffected by the day's commotion. "He didn't even seem bothered by all those people," she observed. "Bailey's used to attention," David explained. "Since he was a cub, he's been socialized with all kinds of people. He really seems to enjoy meeting new folks, especially children." In the weeks following the event, support for Bailey continued to grow. Letters of support arrived daily for Dr. Parker, and the opposition petition had practically lost momentum. Most importantly, Dr. Parker received positive news about the licensing process. "The authorities are impressed with the documentation we submitted and the community's response," he reported during a committee meeting. "They want to conduct a final inspection of the property next week, but everything indicates the license will be approved." Jennifer could hardly believe it. After months of hard work and constant worry, it seemed Bailey might finally stay with his family legally. The final inspection was less intimidating than the first. The inspectors seemed more interested in verifying that all necessary modifications had been completed than in questioning the suitability of the situation. "I'm impressed with the improvements you've made," Inspector Douglas told Margaret. "This property now meets or exceeds all the required standards for a private sanctuary." A week after the inspection, Dr. Parker called with the news everyone had been waiting for. "The license has been approved," he announced. "Bailey can stay." Jennifer was at Margaret's house when the call came. She watched as the 82-year-old woman broke down in tears of relief and joy. 12 years, Margaret murmured through her tears. 12 years worrying that one day they'd come and take him away, and now he can stay forever. Sarah and David hugged their mother, and Jennifer felt her own tears forming. Bailey, as if sensing the emotion in the air, approached and rested his massive head in Margaret's lap. "You're safe, my boy," Margaret whispered to the bear, stroking his fur. "You're safe and can stay home." That night, Jennifer returned to her own home in a state of euphoria. Michael was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she walked in. "From your smile, I'm guessing," It was good news, he said. The best news, Jennifer replied, sharing the approval of the license. Michael hugged her and they stood in the kitchen for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what they'd helped achieve. Jennifer, can I say something? Michael asked when they pulled apart. Of course. These past few weeks and working together on Bailey's project have been some of the best weeks we've had as a couple in years. Jennifer nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. Having a common purpose made all the difference, she agreed. It reminded us why we fell in love in the first place. And our own problems seemed less scary when we were focused on helping others, Michael added. It was true. Throughout the process of helping Margaret and Bailey, Jennifer and Michael had rediscovered their ability to work together as a team. Their financial troubles hadn't magically disappeared, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. Ethan appeared in the kitchen, tugging at Jennifer's pant leg. "Mommy, can I go see Bailey tomorrow?" he asked. "Of course, sweetheart," Jennifer replied, scooping up her son. "And now Bailey gets to stay forever, so you can visit him whenever you want." "Bailey happy," Ethan declared, clapping his hands. Jennifer smiled, realizing her 3-year-old had grasped something many adults had forgotten. Sometimes love and happiness mattered more than rules and regulations. In the months that followed, life settled into a new normal. Margaret and Bailey now had legal security to continue their lives together. The private sanctuary underwent regular inspections, all of which Bailey passed with ease. Jennifer remained involved with the family, but gradually shifted her focus more to her own family and Michael's shop, which was thriving thanks to new connections and the positive reputation they'd earned in the community. But she never forgot the lessons she'd learned during the months of fighting to save Bailey. She had discovered leadership qualities she never knew she possessed, that working for a cause greater than herself was deeply rewarding, and that love, whether between humans or between humans and animals, could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. A year after Ethan and Bailey's first meeting, Jennifer organized a birthday party to celebrate. It was a small gathering, just the immediate families involved and a few neighbors who had become close friends through the project. Ethan, now 4 years old, had become Bailey's official ambassador to visiting children. He took his role very seriously, explaining to each new child how to be gentle with the little bear. Margaret, at 83, seemed to have gained new energy since the stress of the legal situation had been resolved. She often spoke about her plans to develop more formal educational programs using Bailey. "You know," she said to Jennifer during the party, "this whole experience has taught me it's never too late to fight for what we believe in. I could have given up when things got tough, but choosing to fight was the best decision I ever made." Jennifer nodded, remembering her own transformation through the process. "For me, it showed that problems that seem impossible might have solutions if we're willing to work hard and accept help from others," she replied. Bailey, now 13, seemed oblivious to all the attention. He lay on the grass, letting Ethan and the other children use his belly as an improvised bench while they told stories. Michael walked up behind Jennifer and hugged her. "Remember when you thought finding a bear in our living room was the worst day of your life?" he teased. Jennifer laughed. "Actually, I think it was the best day of my life," she said. "It changed everything for us." "Changed everything for the better," Michael agreed. As she watched Ethan play with Bailey, surrounded by an extended family of neighbors turned dear friends, Jennifer reflected on how one seemingly chaotic event had led to so many positive things. She had learned that family wasn't defined just by blood, but by love and mutual care. She had discovered how quickly a community could form around a just cause, and most importantly, she had found that she herself was stronger and more capable than she'd ever imagined. Dr. Parker, who had become a dear friend to the family, joined the group. "You know," he said, "in 15 years of helping families legalize rescue animals, I've never seen a community come together as strongly as it did here." "I think Bailey inspires that in people," Margaret replied. "He's always had a gift for bringing out the best in them." Jennifer looked at the giant bear who had changed her life and had to agree. There was something special about Bailey that went beyond his obvious gentleness or striking appearance. He seemed to have a way of showing people that love and care could overcome any obstacle. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Ethan refused to let go of Bailey. I don't want to say goodbye, he protested, hugging the bear's furry neck. You're not saying goodbye, Jennifer explained patiently. You're saying see you tomorrow because Bailey will always be here whenever you want to visit. Always? Ethan asked. Always, Margaret promised, and Jennifer knew it was a promise the elderly woman would keep with her life. Later, that night, after Ethan had been put to bed and fallen asleep, Jennifer and Michael sat in their backyard, gazing at the stars and reflecting on the extraordinary year they'd had. Do you think Ethan will remember all this when he's older? Michael asked. I hope so, Jennifer replied. Not just for Bailey, but for the lesson that it's worth fighting for those we love, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they work together. Do you think we've changed? Michael asked. As people, as a couple? Jennifer considered the question. I think we've become who we were always capable of being, she answered. We just needed the right situation to realize it. Michael nodded, understanding what she meant. Sometimes I think Bailey didn't come into our home by accident, he said. I think he appeared exactly when we needed him. Margaret always said Bailey has a gift for finding people who need help, Jennifer recalled. Maybe we needed help more than we realized, or maybe he needed our help and helping him helped us too, Michael suggested. Jennifer smiled, appreciating the simple wisdom of her husband's observation. Either way, she said, I'm grateful he came into our lives. Even if he gave you the biggest scare of your life, as Michael asked, teasing. Especially because of that, Jennifer replied, laughing. Sometimes we need a big scare to remind us what really matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the extraordinary journey they'd shared. Finally, Michael stood and reached out his hand to Jennifer. Let's go inside, he said. Tomorrow is a new day, and who knows what adventures await us. Jennifer took her husband's hand and stood up, glancing one last time toward Margaret's house, where she knew a giant bear was peacefully sleeping under the stars, safe in the love of his human family. She had started that year as a housewife, worried about financial troubles and marital tensions. She was ending it as a confident community leader who had helped save the life of an extraordinary animal and, in the process, had saved her own marriage and discovered strengths she never knew she had. As she stepped inside, Jennifer felt a deep sense of gratitude for Bailey, for Margaret, for her community, and for all the unexpected ways love could manifest in the world. And when she finally lay down to sleep that night, she smiled as she remembered how it had all begun with a brave little boy finding a gentle giant bear in his living room, and how that seemingly impossible encounter had changed so many lives for the better. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of this incredible story of love, courage, and community. Do you think Jennifer and Michael made the right choices in helping Margaret and Bailey? Leave your honest opinion about this heartwarming journey in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.